One of the reasons I wanted to make this video is just so that it exists. I wanted to erect a small online monument to a songwriter that I love and admire. But before we do that, I feel I should start by defining not necessarily what I understand by Americana, but how my understanding of this term came to be. To begin with, it's a term used to describe materials concerning an or characteristic of America, its civilization or its culture. Naturally, music is one of these components of culture, and so you get Americana music. The Americana Music Association, the AMA, defined the term in 2020 as the rich threads of country, folk, blues, soul, bluegrass, gospel, and rock in our tapestry. Considering the latter addition of rock in that definition, we can surmise that Americana, much like Englishness, is a loose umbrella term that, like an infinite vacuum, sucks in elements which become more and more resonant with the culture over time, to the point that they themselves become so synonymous with that same culture that they become emblems of that culture. As a European who loves music is an amateur musicologist, I have a certain affinity with Americana because I feel I can trace its roots in a lot of Mediterranean music, Irish music, and German Schlager music, to name some examples. Having also grown up on a lot of older American music, and being so exposed to it through the internet, it's familiar to me on a very profound and personal level. The more I got into this music, the more I started unconsciously formulating fantasies around it. What I mean by this is that I've only ever been to one place in the US, and that's New York City. Now, as much as New York is another side to this multifaceted meaning of what is American, it's not exactly the imagery and connotations that I'm concerned with here. What I'm concerned with lies in the American landscape: old towns, drifters, highways, rolling tumbleweed. You get the idea. It's a reductive and superficial perception of only one side of a huge nation. The music itself that I listened to was animating this landscape of what America means to me. And I guess at this point, I had one of those moments where it felt like I never really understood this term before. Americana suddenly made sense to me. I could understand enough of all the components that it sunk in like never before. It wasn't just about the twang anymore. It became something more intangible and bigger, more abstract. Yet somehow I felt like I had a grip on it. As I was going through this whole period, I was invited to a last-minute tag-along with some friends of mine at a chill Sunday dinner party, where the host was playing whole records on his turntable. At one point in the night, barely noticing that the music had stopped, my attention was suddenly pulled towards the music as it started again. It was beautiful, raw music, unique, inimitable delivery, and a great sense of naivety knitted into this trembling, breaking voice of experience. Naturally, I inquired as to what was playing, and the guy simply said, "Oh, this is Michael Hurley. I think you'd like him." The party was over, and that was that. The next day, I remember looking up the guy's name on Spotify and finding out Hurley had been making music since the early 60s, and I had no clue which record was being played the night before. So I ended up adding his debut, aptly titled First Songs, to my library. And I remember putting it on as I was doing some chores. I quickly realized this wasn't the same record. But still, whatever I loved about the music that night was already present in the guy's debut. This bare naked realness, unfiltered and offering a full range of emotions. Michael Hurley is a singer-songwriter born in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He grew up listening to an eclectic mix of American music, from Fats Weller to Fats Domino to Les Paul and Mary Ford, and eventually got more into rock and roll in his teenagehood. In 1964, he was recovering from a bout of mononucleosis, which left him bedridden for a while. During this time, he recorded first songs, which, as I've mentioned before, pointed to a clear route of what the artist wanted to do, or at least already pointed to a clear route of what the artist wanted to do. Hurley would go on to be a part of the Greenwich Village folk scene and would end up bumping into smaller pockets of the counterculture, such as the freak folk groups. But mostly during this period, Hurley lived a somewhat nomadic lifestyle, drifting between different parts of the country, taking on odd jobs, playing small gigs. He remained an underground figure and was not really part of the mainstream folk scene that was blossoming at the time. At this point, Hurley became friends with Jesse Colin Young, frontman of the then popular psych folk band The Youngbloods, who had a hit called Get Together. Young was a fan and so decided to help Hurley with a record deal with the Youngbloods label Raccoon Records, which is also an imprint of Warner Brothers. This deal would eventually lead to Hurley's second album, Armchair Boogie. One song features on both of these early records, The Werewolf. This song captures the sometimes eerie energy in Hurley's songs. It's not a common kind of eeriness, but it's a quirky eeriness. The subject is delivered with Hurley's typical simple use of language, yet it's a complex, multifaceted song. The werewolf becomes a symbol of misfit, a misunderstood character whose repellent and abrasive presence is only a surface layer and nothing else. For the werewolf, have pity, not fear, and not hate, because the werewolf might be someone that you've known of late. It's a beautiful song about having empathy. Still, it is a strange and twisted song in some ways, and that has to be acknowledged. If you want to know more about that, just listen to the song. Hurley would go on to write many albums over the years, illustrating his music with beautiful creative paintings for his artworks. But enough about his life. That is perhaps not that relevant to the rest of this video. One of the prevailing characteristics of certain Americana music is that live feel. Most folk communities, for example, were and are still pretty much about live performance. When I moved to Berlin, I found myself hanging out with a community of folk musicians who would take out their instruments and play on any occasion. This was fascinating to me, and although I can understand that there's nothing special about it for some people, it meant a lot to me because where I come from, this wasn't so common, and yet I realized I had had a craving for it my whole life. I soon started to realize that for most of my life, as much as I loved music, I had misconception and a bias towards studio work. Of course, that is a beautiful and, let's be honest, very new form of musical output, and it has allowed artists to find endless creative ways of expressing the sound they want in a more curated and specific way. But for the vast majority of history, music was only live. It was only performed. Naturally, this was and still is a big part of most music scenes, and especially the folk scenes. There are several obvious reasons why this is the case, seeing as most folk musicians tend to play solo, which makes it easier. And most of these instruments that they play are acoustic, which again makes it easier to play anywhere. And on top of that, folk music is very closely associated with roots music, which of course means that there is a certain reverence towards tradition. And what is more traditional in music than live performance? In an interview with Clement Bresnikar on its Psychedelic Baby magazine, Hurley says, "When I started learning to play the guitar and entertaining family at first and later playing at parties on both sides of the Delaware River, I began to carry a guitar with me everywhere I went, just about. It was a little Stella with blonde paint job. It actually belonged to my sister Maureen, but I played it night and day, and it never had a case. Who needed a case?" Clearly, he lived this. In addition, he honored it in the studio as well, since his records all sounded like a live session, with not much, if any, dubbing involved. It also feels like most of Hurley's songs were improvised in some way or another, with just a vague starting point, such as having the melody and the main chorus, maybe. There's no way of me confirming this, so I'm only speculating, but I want to talk about it anyway, because I wanted to explain why the word abstract is in this video title. To me, the abstract part of Hurley's music comes in this patchy way. Take what, in my opinion, is one of his greatest songs, for example, Sweetie D. What is abstract about it? Well, you can always sense the emotion of Hurley's songs very quickly, but sometimes it takes a while to understand where it's coming from, and sometimes even where it's going. The narrative in the song is suggestive more than linear. It's slices of memory from the relationship that he's talking about, knitted into moments of vulnerable expression of struggle and hardships, held together by this strange image of the pre-chorus, in which he says, "Wash the clothes, Sweetie D, and hang 'em on the line. And I can see by the way you wash the clothes, your cooking must be fine." Heard in 2024, such a line could easily be interpreted as problematic, maybe. But its delivery implies something else. It implies admiration and love and respect towards his lover in a phraseology that is akin to that of a child. There's something so purely in the moment that I can vividly see Hurley lost in the melody of the song and whipping out this simple rhyme that works so well and so innocently, especially when followed by the chorus bit in which he says, sometimes seems like everybody's got a little hard luck. And I know one thing for sure, baby, I've been having mine. He does the same thing in T-Song from his first record, where after a few verses of talking about mundane tea-related stuff, he suddenly breaks out the line, I don't really care that she's left me. And this is completely out of nowhere. Like, at no point does he talk about a girl or anything. He just says this line, and it takes you caught by surprise. And this is perhaps even better of an example, as you can hear the song was somewhat improvised in its infancy and not meddled with much afterwards. You can really hear this in that song because there are these image-based verse lines followed by a moaning chorus, and it really feels like some mantra kind of. The mood is set from the get-go, and it doesn't change at all. It's a mantric moan of loneliness that creeps onto you, disguised in his ramblings about his wanting 6 cups of tea, not 1 or 2, till he lashes out the heartbreaking story in 7 words, without needing to say anything else about it at any other point in the song. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because there is something so pure about this method of writing and playing. The artist, with instrument in hand and nothing in mind, plays and sings and conjures up a certain level of raw emotion that you just can't sit down and write. Stream of consciousness is a good phrase to understand each other here. To some extent, this is what I feel can be produced, or this is what to some extent, this is what I feel can produce some of the most heartfelt pieces of music, in some cases at least. As much as people sometimes say that you can't be in a bad place to make art, I believe that it could be perfect for this kind of art. Picture the artist as a fisherman.
Where is he?
Huh? He's still on?
I don't know. With me? Yeah. Is that what's happening?
I don't know. Let's take it in by hand then.
Well, let's just take it. How are you going to do that, man?
I don't know.
You can't do it. You can't do it because it's too big.
By hand. Is it coming in?
I don't know.
Yeah, it is. There's no slack. Yes, it is coming in.
Oh, you mean it was too much? Too much. Well, where am I at, though? Oh. Is he still there?
There's something there.
Huh?
There's something there.
As opposed to the artist as someone who sits down and composes or designs. But picture a fisherman who's just kind of fishing and waiting for it to come. But he's there fishing. He's not planning a strategy on how to capture the fish. Conjure is probably the best word here, since the artist becomes a channel for the music to go through. And as it's doing so, it is being warped around through his or her complex emotional pool, finally erupting in ways that could potentially be more abstract, yet somehow even more striking. In that early 6-year gap between his first 2 albums, Hurley was just playing music all the time, everywhere, honing in this abstract, quote, method, unquote, of writing. In this way, to me, he captures a certain combination of all these things. His music is a beautiful example of Americana because it is hymnal like gospel, full of spirit like soul, littered with tales of folk and the country, and paved like a highway full of characters with stories of love, loss, despair, and 3-word ruminations. And on top of all of this, it feels sparse and spacious enough, leaving you room to feel and imagine for yourself. His music is a bridge to something bigger and infinite. It takes me away to another time in my life, a time in some fantastical future where I'm at peace and contemplative, processing the hills and the valleys of my life. I've never met the guy, but I love Michael Hurley. He's a truly beautiful soul.
open up.